Welcome to Lantern and Olive. Tonight, a quiet retelling from the Odyssey. For sleep, let's begin. The return to Ithaca. The Phaeacians were a people who understood the sea. Their ships moved without oars, guided by thought alone, swift as a hawk and steady as the turning stars. When the time came for the stranger to leave their island, they prepared their finest vessel. They loaded it with gifts. Bronze tripods, bolts of woven cloth, gold worked into delicate shapes. These were the customs of a generous people. The king and queen had listened to the wanderer's story over the course of 2 long evenings. He had told them everything: the war, the years at sea, the islands, and the sorrows. They sat by firelight as he spoke, and the hall grew quiet around his voice. When he finished, the queen folded her hands and nodded. The king gave the order to prepare the ship. Odysseus stood at the harbor in the last light of day. The water was calm. The sky was the color of wine-dark silk stretched across the west. He had bathed and dressed in fresh linen. He carried with him a weariness so deep it had become a kind of companion. It had been with him for 10 years. The crew of young Phaeacian sailors waited at the oars, though the ship would need no rowing. They had spread a thick woolen blanket on the stern deck. The wood of the ship smelled of cedar and salt. The ropes were new. The sail was tightly furled. He boarded. He thanked the king. He spoke his farewell to Nausicaa, who stood at the edge of the harbor with lamplight behind her. His words were simple. Hers were simpler. Then the ship moved. It slid from the harbor without sound. The water parted before the hull like a curtain drawn aside by an unseen hand. The town fell away behind them. The torches on the harbor wall became small orange points. Then they disappeared entirely, and there was only the sea. The wanderer lay down on the stern deck. The woolen blanket was thick beneath him. The night air was cool on his face. Above him, the stars spread across the sky in their ancient patterns. The same constellations he had steered by for so long. But tonight, he did not need to read them. Tonight, the ship knew its own way. Sleep came to him almost at once. It did not creep or hesitate. It arrived the way night arrives over open water, completely and without apology. His eyes closed. His breathing deepened. The tension in his shoulders, the guardedness in his jaw, the alertness that had kept him alive for 20 years, all of it let go at once. The ship moved through the wine-dark water. The bow lifted and fell with a rhythm as steady as breathing. The wake behind them glowed faintly in the starlight. No wind disturbed the sail. No wave broke against the hull. The sea was as smooth as olive oil poured from a jar. He slept as he had not slept since he was a young man, the kind of sleep that has no dreams, no interruptions, no awareness of time passing. The kind of sleep that the body gives itself when it finally feels safe. The stars turned overhead. The hours passed. The ship flew on. The Phaeacian sailors watched him with quiet respect. They did not speak above a whisper. They moved softly on the deck, adjusting nothing, for nothing needed adjustment. somewhere in the deep hours of the night, the shoreline of Ithaca appeared. It came out of the darkness slowly, a low shape against the stars. The currents shifted. The salt air carried new scents. Time, stone, earth that had been baked by a different sun. They brought the ship into a sheltered cove. The water there was still. A sandy beach curved inward beneath a canopy of olive trees. An old stone arch stood nearby, weathered by centuries of wind. It was a quiet place, known to fishermen and goat herds, but to few others. The wanderer did not wake. His sleep was so deep that the world could have rearranged itself around him without his knowledge. And in a sense, it did. The sailors lifted him gently. They carried him from the ship to the shore, still wrapped in the woolen blanket. They laid him on the sand beneath the olive trees. They set his gifts beside him. The bronze tripods, the gold, the folded cloth. All of it arranged with care on the beach, above the tide line. Then they departed. The ship slid back into the water as silently as it had come. The cove was empty again. The only sounds were the small lapping of the tide against the sand and the slow breathing of the sleeping man. He slept on. The hours moved. The stars began to fade in the east. The sky lightened by degrees, from black to deep blue to the color of smoke. The olive trees above him caught the first gray light and held it in their silver leaves. When he woke, he did not know where he was. This was not confusion born of unease. It was something gentler than that. The world around him was wrapped in mist, a thick, soft mist that blurred every shape and muffled every sound. The trees were shadows. The shoreline was a suggestion. The sea was a voice without a body. He sat up slowly. The sand beneath him was cool and fine. He could feel it between his fingers. He could smell the salt air, the olive leaves, the faint sweetness of wild thyme growing somewhere nearby. Everything was familiar and strange at once, like a song heard through a closed door. He looked at the gifts piled beside him. He touched the bronze. It was real. The cloth was real. The sand was real. But the mist held everything in suspension. Then a figure appeared. A young shepherd, or so it seemed. Slight, calm, standing a little distance away with the ease of someone who belonged there. The wanderer called out softly and asked what land this was. The shepherd told him. The word came through the mist like a bell sounded once and left to ring. Ithaca. The wanderer heard it, and something in his chest shifted. Not a jolt, not a rush, a settling. The way a stone settles into the bed of a stream after being carried a long way by the current. He did not weep. He did not leap to his feet. He sat in the sand and let the word find its place inside him. Ithaca, the island of his birth, the home he had carried in his mind like an ember through every storm and every exile. The shepherd smiled. The mist around them thinned, and as it did, the figure changed. The slight frame grew taller. The eyes brightened with a light that was not quite human. Athena stood before him, the gray-eyed goddess who had watched over him since the beginning. She told him the mist was her doing, a veil drawn over the island to give them time to speak in peace. She was practical, as she had always been. But she was also warm. She sat beside him beneath the olive tree, and for a while they simply talked. The olive tree was ancient. Its trunk had twisted over centuries into a shape that was both strong and gentle. Its roots gripped the stony ground. Its branches spread wide, and the leaves moved in the faint morning breeze with a sound like quiet breathing. The mist drifted through its canopy in slow silver threads. They spoke of the years that had passed. They spoke of the palace and the changes that had come. They spoke of his wife and his son. The goddess was frank, and the wanderer listened without interruption. He asked few questions. He trusted her as he trusted the ground beneath him. As they talked, the mist began to lift. It did not vanish. It dissolved, the way a dream dissolves when the dreamer wakes slowly. The shapes of the cove emerged, the curve of the beach, the stone arch, the dark water of the harbor beyond, and beyond that, the hills, the familiar hills of Ithaca, rising in green and brown and gray against a sky that was clearing from the east. He saw the ridgeline he had known since childhood. He saw the goat paths winding through the scrub. He saw the distant shape of Mount Neriton, its peak softened by morning cloud. Each detail arrived quietly, like old friends entering a room one by one. The goddess watched him looking. She said nothing for a time. The breeze carried the scent of the sea and the dry hillsides. The sun had not yet crested the ridge, but the light was growing. The shadows were soft. The tide whispered against the shore. At last, the wanderer exhaled. It was a long breath, drawn from somewhere deep within him. The kind of breath that carries years of tension out of the body and returns nothing but stillness. He leaned back against the trunk of the olive tree. The bark was rough and warm against his shoulders. The world around him settled into its true shape. The mist was gone. The light was gentle and real. The island held him the way the olive thicket had held him on the shore of Sharia. Not with force, but with the simple fact of being there. Athena rose and told him she would return. There was more to do, but not yet. Not in this hour. This hour belonged to the homecoming itself. She moved away through the trees and was gone, leaving him alone on the beach of his own country. He sat beneath the olive tree. The morning light crept across the sand. The sea breathed. The starlight had faded, but its memory hung in the brightening sky. Somewhere on the hillside, a goat bell rang once and was still. His eyes grew heavy. The warmth of the sun, the shelter of the tree, the deep knowledge that the ground beneath him was his own. All of it gathered around him like a wool cloak drawn close. His breathing slowed. His hands rested open on his knees. The sounds of the cove, the water, the wind, the leaves, braided together into a single continuous murmur. And the wanderer, home at last, let his eyes close. The olive branches moved above him in their slow, patient rhythm. The light held him. The silence deepened, and he drifted gently into the quiet arms of sleep. the island breathed around him. The tide kept its ancient time, and everything, finally, was still. And so the story rests for now. The fire has settled to embers. The wind has grown still. Somewhere the sea continues its ancient song, steady as breathing, patient as sleep. Let yourself drift. Let yourself rest. The story will be here when you return.